I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
A situation that had been building inside the palace for weeks finally reached its breaking point, forcing an unexpected transfer of power from Charles to William. With Camilla at the center of a growing scandal, what happened next changed everything about how the monarchy operated. What could make a sitting monarch to surrender control while still wearing the crown? Join us as we find out. From friendship to offense, Prince William arrived at his father's residence unannounced, bypassing the usual protocol that governed even informal meetings. His expression left no room for misinterpretation when palace personnel saw him stride past them without his typical greetings. The weight of recent revelations about connections to disgraced individuals had pushed the air beyond his usual patience, and he had spent weeks watching the whole situation, measuring his response, and calculating the damage to an institution already fragile from years of scandal and public skepticism. Camilla's surprise was evident at his unexpected arrival. The friendship she maintained with a certain former royal family member had been decades long, rooted in shared history and loyalty that predated her marriage to Charles. She believed private relationships could remain separate from public duty, that personal bonds deserved protection, even when circumstances grew complicated. She saw no reason to abandon someone who had stood by her during the darkest years when the press attacked her relentlessly, and the public viewed her with suspicion and hostility. Well, William challenged that assumption with facts that could not be ignored. Reports showed the extent of interactions that continued even after the scandal erupted publicly. Messages exchanged, invitations extended, support offered when distance should have been maintained. Every piece of evidence pointed to a pattern that threatened the monarchy's reputation at precisely the moment when public trust hung by the thinnest thread, and the institution could not afford even the appearance of tolerance for relationships that compromised its integrity. In defense of her choices, the Queen has believed for years that loyalty mattered, especially when someone faced widespread condemnation. Abandoning friends during crisis moments went against every principle she valued. The relationship had existed long before recent troubles emerged, and cutting ties now felt like cowardice. She reminded William of times when she herself had been the subject of brutal public judgment, when friends who stood by her made the difference between survival and complete isolation. How could she become the person who fled at the first sign of controversy after others had shown her such support? But the monarchy operated under different rules than ordinary friendships. What seemed like loyalty in private life became liability in public service. Yet the institution survived because it maintained standards that set it apart, because it demonstrated judgment that earned respect even from skeptics. Every picture, every chance encounter, every rumor of continued contact would be used by critics already questioning whether the royal family truly understood the gravity of the situation. William's voice remained controlled, but his reasons cut through every defense Camilla attempted to construct. The argument eventually escalated beyond the specific friendship into fundamental disagreements about priorities and obligations. Camilla viewed the monarchy as an institution run by human beings with personal lives that deserved protection. William saw it as something larger than any individual, a symbol that required sacrifice from everyone who served it. She believed compassion and personal integrity mattered more than public perception. He insisted public perception determined whether the monarchy survived to the next generation. The gap between their positions seemed wider with time. Meanwhile, Charles was absent from the initial confrontation, informed only after William had left. He faced an impossible position when palace personnel brought him the details. His wife and his heir stood on opposite sides of a divide that demanded resolution. Avoiding the issue would only deepen the crisis, but choosing sides meant damaging one of the two most important relationships in his life. The stress added to existing health concerns that already limited his ability to handle the demands of kingship. Sleep became impossible as he weighed options that all seemed to lead toward more conflict. On the sides, senior officials waited to see which direction the king would take. Scheduled events continued with forced normalcy, while uncertainty poisoned every private conversation. Some courtiers sided with Camilla, arguing that personal relationships deserved respect and that William overstepped his authority. The others aligned with the heir, insisting that survival required ruthless prioritization of institutional needs over individual preferences. The division spread through every level of the household, creating factions that eyed each other with suspicion across meeting rooms. William returned 3 days later with a formal ultimatum that removed any remaining ambiguity: complete separation from anyone connected to the scandal, or he would take his concerns beyond private family channels. The threat represented a line crossed, an heir effectively dictating terms to the sitting monarch. Constitutional experts who learned of the confrontation later struggled to find out what was driving William to pose such a direct challenge. The balance of power within the family had shifted in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Charles understood that yielding meant undermining his own authority, but refusing meant open conflict with the man who would inherit everything he had waited decades to receive. The friendship that seemed so defensible in theory became the catalyst for a crisis that exposed every structural weakness in the institution itself. Crossing the line of succession, the constitutional framework that governed royal succession had remained essentially unchanged for generations. The heir apparent possessed specific duties and limited authority, waiting in preparation for eventual inheritance while the monarch retained all decision-making power. William shattered that careful balance when he demanded control over family decisions that technically belonged to his father. The move shocked constitutional scholars, not because they disagreed with his goals, but because the method represented such a dramatic departure from established protocol. The ultimatum William delivered carried weight because of timing more than authority. Charles battled health issues that frequently forced cancellations and modifications to his schedule. Treatment continued with no clear endpoint, leaving doubt about long-term prognosis and capability. The king projected strength in public appearances, but everyone inside the palace recognized the impact that illness and stress combined had on a person. William's timing exploited that vulnerability, presenting demands when his father possessed minimal energy for prolonged disputes. The heir's assessment proved brutally accurate. Charles lacked the stamina to fight extended battles on multiple fronts simultaneously while managing his condition. An heir telling a sitting monarch who could be trusted within the family structure went far beyond traditional advisory roles. Senior palace figures divided sharply over William's approach. Some viewed it as necessary leadership during a crisis that threatened institutional survival. The scandal required decisive action, and if the king could not provide it, then someone had to step forward before irreparable damage occurred. Others saw dangerous precedent in an heir effectively bypassing constitutional limitations to seize control. The monarchy depended on clear lines of authority, and blurring those lines created risks that extended far beyond the immediate situation. Private conversations grew heated as advisors debated whether William's intervention represented salvation or a different kind of threat. The specific demand William made left no room for compromise. Everyone in the family must align completely on maintaining distance from individuals connected to the scandal. No communications that could be misunderstood. He wanted unanimous, visible commitment to the position he advocated. Camilla's friendship became the test case because it was the most prominent and the most difficult to defend publicly. If she could not be brought into line, then his strategy for protecting the monarchy would fail before it truly began. Charles faced pressure from multiple directions beyond just his son's ultimatum. Public opinion polling showed declining support for the monarchy, with numbers approaching historically dangerous levels. Calls for abdication appeared in newspapers and social media with increasing frequency. The argument that he should step aside to protect the institution gained traction among commentators who previously defended royal prerogatives. The pile of concerns grew faster than any response could address. The choice Charles confronted went beyond the immediate dispute about one friendship. William's ultimatum represented a broader shift in how the monarchy would operate going forward. Yielding meant accepting that his son's judgment superseded his own, that constitutional norms could be bent when circumstances seemed to require it. Every future dispute would reference this moment as precedent for the heir overruling the monarch. His authority would become conditional rather than absolute, subject to challenge whenever William decided that institutional needs justified intervention. William made his calculation obvious to anyone paying attention. He could afford to push boundaries because he held leverage his father could not match. Public perception favored the younger generation over the older one. Catherine and their children represented the future that people wanted to believe in, while Charles remained associated with past scandals and controversy. If the confrontation became public, William would survive the fallout far better than his father would. The heir's position allowed for aggressive tactics that would destroy anyone else who attempted them. The meetings between father and son grew increasingly tense as William refused to moderate his demands. He presented detailed scenarios about how continued connections would play out in press coverage and public opinion. Each example built his case that compromise meant failure, that half measures would satisfy nobody while pleasing everyone. Charles listened to arguments he could not refute, hearing his own diminished capacity reflected in his son's words. The knowledge that William spoke truth about the monarchy's vulnerability made the situation more difficult rather than less. Palace personnel began noticing changes in how decisions were made during this period. Issues that used to require royal approval started being handled through William's office instead. The shift happened gradually enough that no single moment marked the transition, but the broader effect became undeniable. Senior advisors found themselves consulting the heir on matters that constitutionally belonged to the king. Nobody announced the change or acknowledged it openly, but everyone adapted to the new reality because the alternative meant chaos. William's ultimatum succeeded not through formal transfer of power, but through gradual assumption of authority that nobody possessed the strength to challenge. The line he crossed disappeared behind him as the palace adjusted to function under effective control of someone who technically remained merely heir, the impossible choice. The king's office sat empty for hours in the morning when Charles finally accepted that delay would no longer serve as strategy. He had postponed the inevitable decision through every means available. Ed's hoping that time might present a solution that served both his marriage and his relationship with his son. That hope faded slowly over weeks of rising pressure from all directions. The scandal refused to fade from headlines. Public anger intensified rather than diminished, and William showed no sign of moderating his demands. Reality closed in around options that seemed plentiful just months earlier. Camilla recognized the shift before Charles acknowledged it openly. She noticed the change in his tone during their private conversations, the way he stopped defending their shared position with his usual conviction. Small signals turned into unavoidable truth. He was preparing to choose the monarchy over their marriage, or at least over her ability to maintain relationships she valued. The realization brought pain she had not anticipated, even though the outcome seemed predictable from the start. The private meeting where Charles explained his decision lasted less than 30 minutes. He presented the choice as inevitable rather than preference, something forced by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The words rang hollow, even as he spoke them, because they both knew he possessed authority to reject William's ultimatum. He was still king, still possessed constitutional power that no heir could legally override. However, power without ability to use it meant nothing, and Charles lacked energy to fight battles on every front simultaneously. His health, the public pressure, William's determination, all combined to make resistance feel impossible, despite remaining technically feasible. Camilla understood institutional demands intellectually, but experiencing abandonment felt different than foreseeing it. The man who had defied his family and the public to marry her now chose to side against her when his son demanded it. Camilla asked only one question during that conversation. She wanted to know if he had truly considered refusing his son's demands, or if the decision had been predetermined from the moment William issued his ultimatum. Charles struggled to answer because honesty required admitting he had looked for ways to avoid disappointing either of them, but eventually concluded that William held more leverage. William could threaten escalation that would destroy the monarchy's remaining credibility, while Camilla could only threaten to leave. One threat carried institutional weight, while the other remained merely personal. The transfer of decision-making authority happened without formal ceremony or announcement. Charles simply stopped taking part in strategy sessions about family matters and palace crisis management. William began attending meetings that previously excluded him, offering input that gradually transformed into direction. Senior advisors adjusted to the new arrangement with practiced flexibility, understanding that institutional survival mattered more than procedural accuracy. They had served long enough to recognize when power truly shifted, regardless of what constitutional documents claimed. Palace personnel received instructions through channels that had not existed before. All matters that once required the king's approval now flowed through the heir's office instead. The changes affected everything from event planning to family communications. Camilla found herself excluded from discussions that had always included her, discovering decisions already made when she expected to participate in making them. The isolation happened systematically rather than dramatically, each small exclusion building toward complete removal from palace power structures. Charles justified the arrangement to himself through arguments about temporary necessity and eventual restoration of normal order. He claimed the situation required short-term adaptation that would end once the immediate crisis passed. But palace insiders who watched the transition understood that authority once ceded rarely returned voluntarily. William wouldn't surrender control that he had fought to obtain, especially after the strategy proved effective at managing scandal and protecting institutional reputation. The temporary measures would calcify into permanent structures regardless of what Charles told himself. The Queen's influence evaporated faster than anyone anticipated. Courtiers who once sought her opinion on everything from seating arrangements to policy positions now bypassed her entirely. She watched her husband sign documents and approve plans that excluded her input, realizing that the marriage had been redefined around her. She remained queen in title, but lost the partnership that had sustained her through years of public hostility. The cost of Charles's choice manifested in countless small moments of exclusion, rather than single confrontation. William's strategy meetings no longer included his father, except when protocol absolutely demanded the king's presence. The heir assembled his own team of advisors, developing responses to ongoing scandals without seeking approval from the man who technically remained in charge. Charles attended these sessions when invited, but increasingly found himself listening rather than directing, nodding along with plans already finalized before his arrival. His role transformed from leader to symbolic presence, lending legitimacy to decisions made by others. The impossible choice Charles made was really no choice at all by the time he acknowledged it. William had maneuvered the situation until every alternative meant disaster, until supporting his wife meant abandoning the institution, while supporting the institution meant abandoning his wife. The king selected preservation of monarchy over preservation of marriage, but the decision cost him authority over both. He saved the crown by handing it functionally to his son years before death or abdication officially transferred power. Camilla watched the man who fought the world to marry her surrender to their son without the fight she expected. The palace staff observed a king reduced to figurehead while still occupying the throne, and everyone understood that the transition would never reverse regardless of what future circumstances might develop. Camilla's power slips away. The first indication came during a routine planning meeting for upcoming engagements, when Camilla offered suggestions that received polite acknowledgement but no action. Her recommendations for guest lists and event structures disappeared from final plans without explanation or discussion. Palace operations always involved compromises and modifications, as schedules adjusted to accommodate various demands. But the pattern repeated across subsequent meetings until denial became impossible. Her input no longer shaped decisions the way it had throughout her years as queen. Strategy sessions about managing the ongoing scandal provided clearer evidence of her diminished status. Camilla arrived prepared to discuss approaches for addressing public concerns and maintaining family unity. She found conversations already concluded before her arrival, with William's team presenting finalized responses that required only implementation. When she questioned certain elements or suggested alternatives, the room fell silent in ways that communicated more than words could. Her opinion carried no weight because authority had shifted to the heir without formal notice or constitutional process. Palace staff adjusted their behavior around the queen with efficiency that revealed how quickly institutional hierarchies could transform. Personnel who once asked her approval for decisions began routing requests through William's office instead. The change happened gradually enough that pinpointing the exact moment of transition proved impossible, but the result became undeniable within weeks. Camilla would learn about event modifications or policy changes after execution, rather than during planning. Her position transformed from active participant to informed observer of decisions made without her involvement. The exclusion from family discussions proved more painful than loss of administrative influence. Discussions about how to handle relationships with various relatives, decisions about who could attend events or maintain royal status, strategies for protecting the institution from further scandal, all proceeded without including the queen. Charles stopped seeking her counsel on matters that affected her directly, making choices about family dynamics without discussing them first. She discovered plans already finalized when she expected to help formulate them, realizing that her role had been redefined without her consent or input. William's increasing control showed in countless small moments that compiled into a complete power shift. Courtiers began deferring to the heir's preferences, even when they contradicted established protocols that reflected Charles and Camilla's wishes. The justification varied, but the result remained consistent. The institution needed to adapt. Circumstances required flexibility. The future demanded prioritization over the past. Every rationale pointed toward the same conclusion. William's vision for the monarchy superseded whatever his father and stepmother had planned or preferred. The Queen's attempts to maintain her previous influence failed against coordinated resistance that never confronted her directly. Nobody refused her requests explicitly or challenged her authority in ways that invited clear conflict. Instead, her suggestions encountered delays and complications that prevented implementation. Plans she supported somehow never reached finalization, despite appearing to progress normally. The obstruction remained subtle enough to deny, while being effective enough to neutralize her impact on palace operations and family decisions. Camilla watched her staff shrink as personnel were reassigned to other duties or encouraged to accept positions elsewhere. The team that supported her public role and private initiatives gradually dissolved, with replacements arriving slowly if at all. She found herself managing with fewer resources than at any point since becoming queen, forced to scale back activities that had defined her contribution to royal life. The reduction happened through budget adjustments and organizational restructuring rather than direct confrontation, and making resistance difficult without appearing to prioritize personal needs over institutional efficiency. Social dynamics within the family reflected the power shift even more. Camilla noticed younger royals seeking William's approval rather than consulting her or Charles about decisions. The heir's opinion carried more weight than the king's in determining who attended events or received support for their initiatives. Family members positioned themselves for the coming reign by aligning with William instead of maintaining relationships with the current monarchs. The calculation seemed apparent to anyone paying attention. Loyalty to the future mattered more than respect for the present. The friendship that triggered the crisis became impossible to maintain under constant surveillance and criticism. Every contact with this former royal family member generated scrutiny that extended beyond Camilla to affect everyone associated with her. The pressure transformed the relationship from private bond into public liability, forcing distance that neither party wanted but both recognized as unavoidable. Camilla knew that preserving the connection meant accepting complete isolation within the institution she had fought to join. The cost exceeded what any friendship could reasonably demand. Palace advisors who once treated Camilla as equal partner began addressing her with courtesy that masked dismissal. They solicited her opinions occasionally, but clearly as formality rather than genuine interest in her perspective. The meetings where real decisions occurred happened without her presence, on with summaries delivered after conclusions had been reached. She existed in parallel to palace power structures rather than within them, maintaining ceremonial position, while losing substantive influence over anything that mattered. The speed of her decline shocked observers who remembered how firmly she had established herself over years of building credibility and relationships. Power that seemed secure evaporated within weeks once William decided to remove it. The Queen learned that her authority had always depended on Charles's support and institutional acceptance rather than resting on independent foundation. When both were withdrawn simultaneously, nothing remained to prevent her complete exclusion from meaningful participation in royal life. She retained title and public role, but lost everything that made the position significant beyond symbolic representation. The palace continued functioning as it always had, simply without including her in processes that determined its direction and priorities. The unofficial reign begins. William arrived at Buckingham Palace early on mornings when most staff were still preparing for the day ahead. He would review reports and approve decisions that constitutionally belonged to his father, but functionally required someone capable of sustained focus and immediate action. The heir took control without ceremony or announcement, filling the vacuum created by Charles's inability to manage the crushing demands of the monarchy during health crisis and family scandal. Palace personnel adapted to the new reality with practiced discretion, my understanding that survival required acknowledging actual power structures rather than clinging to constitutional theory. The transition manifested in operational details that collectively revealed complete shift in authority. Communications that once required the king's signature began bearing William's approval instead. Decisions about state functions and diplomatic protocols flowed through the heir's office, emerging as finalized plans that assume rather than requested implementation. Foreign dignitaries and government officials understood the situation faster than the public did. They adjusted their approach to reflect reality that William held effective power regardless of his father's continued presence on the throne. Serious negotiations happened with the heir rather than the king. Their policy discussions included William as primary voice while Charles attended, when protocol demanded but contributed minimally. The diplomatic community recognized power when they saw it, and they saw it focused on the Prince of Wales rather than the monarch who technically still reigned. Palace advisors who served Charles found themselves increasingly marginalized as William's team assumed control of key functions. The heir brought in personnel aligned with his vision for the monarchy's future, people who shared his priorities and understood his expectations. The old guard retained positions but lost influence, watching younger colleagues implement strategies that shifted from everything Charles had planned. The transition in personnel mirrored the transition in power, creating structures that would support William's reign while technically still operating under his father's authority. Public appearances revealed the shift to anyone paying close attention. William took center stage at events that previously featured Charles as primary figure. The king attended but stood in background, his role reduced to symbolic presence while his son delivered speeches and made announcements. Photographers captured images that told story of power transfer through positioning and body language rather than requiring explanation. The heir commanded attention, while the monarch faded into supporting roles at functions that theoretically celebrated his kingship. Financial decisions that shaped the royal household's operations moved through William's review, rather than Charles's approval. Budget allocations, staffing choices, facility management, all reflected the heir's priorities instead of the king's preferences. Charles learned about changes when receiving updates rather than participating in planning processes. The control of resources cemented William's authority more effectively than constitutional amendments could have, because money and personnel determined what actually happened, regardless of what documents claimed. The scandal management strategy proceeded entirely under William's direction. He determined how the family responded to new revelations, which statements got released, what distance got maintained from controversial figures. Charles's input became optional rather than essential, sought occasionally for appearance's sake, but not required for decisions to proceed. And the heir's approach dominated because he possessed energy and focus that his father could no longer maintain while battling illness and exhaustion. Effectiveness justified the power grab better than legal authority ever could. Private family matters fell under William's jurisdiction as completely as public affairs did. He decided who maintained royal status and who got excluded from family events. His assessment of relationships and associations determined which relatives received support and which faced isolation. Charles watched his son remake the family structure according to principles that prioritized institutional protection over personal loyalty, seeing the monarchy he spent decades preparing to lead transform under someone else's vision before his reign truly began. The palace staff stopped referring internal disputes or operational questions to the king's office. Problems flowed to William's team instead, where resolution happened quickly according to clear priorities. The heir's decisiveness contrasted sharply with Charles's tendency toward deliberation and consideration of multiple perspectives. Staff preferred working with someone who made firm choices rapidly over someone whose decisions came slowly after extensive consultation. Efficiency favored the new system, regardless of what constitutional correctness might require. Catherine's increasing prominence in public life signaled the future as clearly as William's growing control did. The Princess of Wales appeared at major events with confidence that came from knowing her position was secure. She represented the monarchy's next chapter in ways that made Charles and Camilla seem like transition figures rather than permanent fixtures. The public responded enthusiastically to her presence, preferring the younger couple's image to the older generation's baggage and controversy. foreign tours and state visits began featuring William and Catherine instead of Charles and Camilla. The shift happened through scheduling choices that claimed to account for the king's health limitations, but really reflected recognition that the younger couple projected the image the monarchy needed. Charles accepted the changes because fighting them required energy he no longer possessed, and risked exposing dysfunction that would damage the institution further. His acquiescence to being sidelined completed the power transfer more definitively than resistance would have. The unofficial reign operated so smoothly that many observers forgot it lacked constitutional basis. William governed as if he were already king, making decisions and setting direction without waiting for formal succession. The palace functioned according to his priorities, the family organized around his authority. The public face of monarchy reflected his vision. Charles retained the title and the crown, but everything that made kingship meaningful beyond ceremony had passed to the heir years before his passing officially transferred power. The transition happened without the pomp of coronation or drama of constitutional crisis, and not simply through gradual assumption of authority that nobody possessed strength to prevent or motivation to reverse. The future had arrived ahead of schedule, and everyone inside the institution adapted to reality that outsiders would not recognize until formal announcement finally caught up with facts established long before.